Webster defines crunch time as a critical moment or period, like the end of a game, when decisive action is needed. Every sports fan knows this time in the game. Your palms sweat just a little more, your heart races just a little bit faster, and you live and die with every play until the final seconds tick off the clock and you're either celebrating a victory or disappointed by the defeat. The team at Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network understands just how critical these moments are. For us, it begins as soon as the next set of games are on the board. We evaluate the opening lines and any breaking news throughout the week. We cover each game inside and out, whether it's from inside the locker room to a huddle down on the field, the court, or the ice. We take you inside the meeting room with scouts, coaches, and executives. We have our fingers on the pulse of all the sports that we cover: the National Hockey League, NBA, college basketball, college football, and the National Football League. We are the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network, and we're here to help you find your sports advantage. After all the data has been crunched, we then turn it over to Kenneth for the best analysis around. His unique perspective in both understanding the data and how it applies to the game and how you win is the Crunch Time Sports Advantage. Are you ready? The Crunch Time Jet is fueled and ready for takeoff, and the Crunch Time Express is about to leave the station. Your VIP pass has been approved, so all aboard.
Welcome to the 2024 College Football Team Autopsy Report. An autopsy report is a document that summarizes the findings of an autopsy, an examination of a body after death. It includes details of the examination, tests, and observations performed, as well as the cause and manner of death. Just like a real autopsy report, the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network College Football Autopsy Report examines a team's body of work after the season has concluded. This report includes a review of the team's season win total and whether they met expectations, key offensive, defensive, and special teams metrics that shaped the season, a deep dive into coaching decisions, including situational play and fourth down aggressiveness, a final season grade, evaluating execution, performance in key moments, and consistency. The final verdict, analyzing what went right, what went wrong, and what must be fixed for 2025. With the 2024 season in the rearview mirror, it's time to examine the patient. To present the findings, we have called in our Chief Medical Examiner and Senior Analyst, Kenneth.
And welcome into the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network Team Autopsy Report. Folks, we're heading to Lincoln, Nebraska to talk about the Cornhuskers. And folks, there's a lot to break down with this team, and starting with that head coach. So if you're watching on YouTube or streaming this on our Twitter feed at Crunch Time VIP, want to say a special thank you for joining us. If you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, want to say thank you for joining us as well. Let's get right into it because I got you for the next 26 minutes. Let's unpack a lot of great information here. Okay, Matt Rule, this guy flat out knows how to get it done at the collegiate level. And typically what we've seen from him is year one is a complete teardown. Year two is kind of the building blocks. The foundation now has been laid for his program. And year three is when this coach absolutely takes off. And now he's had a chance to get his program up and going. Let's take a look at his first couple of years at Temple. Year 1, 2-10. Year 2, 6-6. Year 3 and 4, a combined 20 wins and 7 losses. Now, let's take a look at Baylor. First year, 1-11. Year 2, 7-6. Year 3, 11-3. Now, what have we seen at Nebraska? First year, 5-7. Year 2, 7-6. We think we know what may be coming down the pike for Nebraska in 2025, but first let's examine 2024 and see if we can start to see some of those foundational pieces being laid. If you're new to us doing these autopsy reports, everything that I'm going to reference for our viewers on YouTube and our Twitter feed, for our podcast listeners, don't worry. I got you covered with every single piece of data that I'm going to reference here. Now, as we always will start, and we'll start there at the betting window. This team back in June had a season win total of 7.5. If you took the over on that, clearly you didn't understand how Matt Rule coaching tenure goes. So for them to go 6-6 in the regular season, the under would have absolutely been the play in year 2. Now, when we take a look at our composite win total, this is our in-season metric on what your win-loss record should be at the end of the year. 3 very unique but highly predictive data points, and we came to a number of 6.7. So our numbers say that this team should have been a 7-win team in the regular season. So 7-5 instead of 6-6. I think when I pull up their schedule here in just a moment, I'll be able to dictate exactly which game that was. Okay, now speaking of schedules, there are 2 portions of the schedule that we look at for each team. We look at your strength of schedule and your strength of record. Now, when you play in the Big Ten or the other 3 power conferences, you only control about 20 to 25% of your schedule. So basically your non-conference schedule. Your in-conference schedule is already predetermined. So purely luck of the draw how that is going to go. For Nebraska, 0.471, that was the 37th toughest schedule in college football last year. Now, when we look at their strength of record, think of it kind of as if you're judging your opponent's winning percentage. 0.567, that was 49th out of 134 teams in college football last year. So their opponents were power rated in our system a little bit better than what their win-loss record is. And we'll pull it up here on the screen. And like I said, podcast listeners, don't worry, I got you covered here. All right, let's start with UTEP. UTEP was 3-9 last year. The Buffaloes of Colorado, Coach Prime, 9-3. Stepped out of Division I play to play an FCS opponent in Northern Iowa. Okay. Illinois was 9-3. Purdue was 1-11. Rutgers was 7-5. Indiana, America's team, 11-1. Ohio State finished the regular season 10-2. UCLA was 5-7. USC was 6-6. Wisconsin was 5-7, and then the season finale with Iowa 8-4. I said I would be able to track the game that the Huskers lost that they probably should have won. Look no further than the season finale, folks, against Iowa, losing that game 13-10. Really, all it took was just a little bit more execution in that ball game, and Nebraska would have gotten to that 7-win plateau to get over our composite win total. Still would have come up short on the betting total, but that's the thinking behind that. Now, speaking of that, as we have a little bit of a tornado siren here in my part of the world. So if you guys are in that area, please take shelter and be careful. Now, what I want to look at now was the quality of defenses that the Nebraska Cornhuskers faced last year. So we'll use a baseline number of 68 because that's how many Power 4 teams we had last year. And let's just see how many of their opponents were inside of that top 68. Believe it or not, folks, the Colorado Buffaloes were our 16th power ranked defense in college football last year. Illinois was 54th. Rutgers was 64th. America's team in Indiana was 27th. Buckeyes were number 1. UCLA was 50th. USC was 38th. Wisconsin was 36th. And the Iowa Hawkeyes were 22nd. 9 of their opponents were inside of that top 68. And that number would have been even higher if they wouldn't have had UTEP and Purdue on the schedule. UTEP 125th, Purdue 117th. You're talking about an average composite ranking there of 50. This would have been a defense that would have probably been on a 6-6 team last season. So kind of give you some framework there of what their average opponent would have looked like on a week in and week out basis. Let's dive deep into the offensive metrics here. And for the offense, I'm going to give you the NCAA average. I'm going to give you Nebraska's what we call accounting stats in that category. And then we're going to give you our adjusted number for that category. And then for the defense, we'll just give you Nebraska's defensive number in that category, and then our adjusted number in that category. Let's start right there with the points per game. Average team last year scored about 28 points per game. Cornhuskers were at 23.8 points per game. When we adjust for opponent, does tick up a little bit to 25.5 points per game, still below the average there. Average team threw the ball for about 227 yards per game passing last year. Cornhuskers were at 228. When we adjust for opponent, goes up again just a little bit to 231. As far as being able to run the ball, average team last year, 160 yards per game. Nebraska, 131 yards per game. Now, when we adjust for opponent, that does get them right on the average of 159. So an adjusted number of almost 29 yards per game rushing. Now, let's take a look at the total offense. Total offense per team last year, 387 yards per game. Cornhuskers went 359. When we adjust that for opponent, we do see that bump up to 390 yards per game. So their adjusted numbers said that they were slightly above average. When looking at their raw counting numbers, it looks much worse for their offense last year. Now we're going to go next level here with some of the numbers here. The average team adjusted drives ending with a score, that's either a touchdown or a field goal, about 40%. Nebraska's adjusted number, right on it at 40%. The average offense drives ending with a touchdown last year was 29%. The Cornhuskers, again, right on that number, adjusted for 29%. Third down conversions, average team adjusted third down conversion was at 39%. Cornhuskers a little bit better at 41%. This team did a less than phenomenal job of protecting the quarterback. 27 sacks. Now that can be contribute to a lot of different things. First time starter there at the quarterback position in Dylan Raiola. Offensive line struggles, play calling. So it's not just one thing when you see a team give up that number of sacks. So we always like to kind of point that out when we're looking at that. Now, let's take a look at our 3 E's. Oh, I'm sorry. Before I get to that, 17 turnovers there for the Cornhuskers. Let's take a look at our 3 E's. And what I'm looking at here is how effective, how explosive, and how efficient was your offense last season. When we look at the Cornhuskers, 52nd most effective offense last year. As far as explosive plays coming from that offense, next to nothing. 97th was their ranking. And then as far as efficiency goes, they were 65th. When you sum it all up, this was the 72nd ranked offense in college football for us last year out of 134 teams. So you're talking about average offense. This is the textbook definition of being an average offense. Now, really quickly, let's talk about the quarterback here because he's going to be back next year, and we're expecting to see some progression here from the young quarterback. Dylan Raiola, 13 games last year, completed 67% of his passes. We absolutely can live with that. 2,819 yards. Can live with that, averaging about 217 yards per game through the air. 13 touchdowns, but here's what we didn't like. The 11 interceptions. Got to get much better. Cut those interceptions in half. Double the touchdown production. Now we're talking about an elite quarterback there. Now let's take a look at the defensive numbers here. And again, we're going to stick with that baseline of 68. And we're going to look at how many of Nebraska's opponents' offenses were inside of that top 68. So really want to judge how good was this Nebraska defense last year. Colorado, 14th power ranked offense for us last year. Fighting Illini was 45th. Rutgers was 46th. Again, America's team. The Indiana Hoosiers were 3rd. Ohio State was 8th. USC was 27th. Wisconsin was 66th. And then Iowa had the 30th power ranked offense for us last year. So 8 of their opponents were inside of that top 68. Again, 2 teams outside of the top 100, same 2 teams. And you combine that with UCLA being the 89th power ranked offense, really kind of drug that number down quite a bit. Again, average composite ranking there, 51. Again, you're looking at an offensive team that would have probably been about a 6-6 team on a week in and week out basis. And that's despite playing 3 teams inside of the top 15. When you play that many teams outside of the top 85, really drags that number down quite a bit. Okay, let's give you the defensive breakdowns here. The Cornhuskers gave up 19.8 points per game last year. When we adjust for opponent, we actually see that number improve to 16.8. So a 3-point improvement when we adjust for their opponent there. Passing yards per game allowed, 210 yards per game. When we adjust that for opponent, this pass defense for the Cornhuskers was even better, 183 yards per game. So a 27 yard per game improvement there on what was already a solid number. As far as their rush defense, 106 yards per game. Now, when we adjust for opponent, a little bit of a regression there to 114 yards per game, but still phenomenal rush defense. 315 yards of total offense allowed to their opponents. When we adjust for opponent, that comes down to 297 yards per game. So solid job there by the Cornhuskers defense there. Let's dive deep into those metric numbers once again now for the defense. Their opponents adjusted scoring drives, 24.5%. That's absolutely phenomenal. Drives ending with a touchdown, 18.1%. Absolutely phenomenal job there. And then their opponents adjusted third down conversions, only 32% there by their opponents. So fantastic job by this defense. And this defense also did a really solid job of getting after the opposing quarterback. 26 sacks last year. You will absolutely take that. Their opponents converting on third downs. 19 attempts, only 9 conversions. So 47%. Again, better than the average last season. Did force 16 turnovers. So we'll talk about that here in just a moment. Now, let's take a look at the 3 E's. And here we're going to see a completely different picture from that offense. Effectiveness, this was the 5th best defense in college football in our metrics as far as effectiveness. As far as not giving up explosive plays, 23rd. for us being an efficient defense, getting your opponents off the field, 13th best in college football. Add it all up, this was the 12th ranked defense from an overall metric standpoint for us in those three categories. So phenomenal job by the defense there, really carrying the weight for this team. Special teams, mixed bag of peanuts, if you will. 11 out of 17 on field goal conversions, 65%. Got to be better than that. Their punter, probably the better of these two units. Averaged about 4 punts per game, 45.7 yards per punt. That was good for 12. So again, like I said, mixed bag there. Turnover differential, -1 there. Penalties, not that big of an issue, basically right there on the average, about 6.5 penalties for about 54 yards of penalties per game. Now, as far as Coach Rule, let's talk about him here for just a moment before we get into the offense and defensive splits. In one-score games last year, Coach Rule absolutely struggled. 1 win, 5 losses in one-score games. And folks, all 5 of those coming in, well, let me take a look here. Yep. So that one win actually came against, who am I looking at here? Came against Rutgers. Wow. Okay. Now, against quality opponents, 2 wins, 5 losses. So again, not doing a good job when you step up in weight class. And as for Coach Rule being aggressive, going for it on 4th downs, only 11.7% of the time is he going to go for it. So that ranks him 101st out of 144 qualifying coaches last season. All right, let's get into the splits here. How did this team look in their wins versus how did they look in their losses? We'll start with the offense first. In those 6 wins, this offense was absolutely rolling. 31 points per game, 244 yards passing on 31 attempts, 7.9 yards per attempt, 11.5 yards per completion. Solid, not spectacular, just solid. 159 yards per game rushing on 36 rushing attempts, 4.4 yards per rushing attempt there. Let's take a look at what this team did on 3rd downs conversions in those wins. 40% on 3rd downs, 57% on 4th downs. Committed just 4 turnovers in those victories. In the 6 losses, offense 16.3 points per game, just 212 yards per game passing on 37 attempts, 5.8 yards per attempt, 9.2 yards per completion. Like I said, when they stepped up in weight class, you could see this passing game really struggled. As far as the run game, 34 rushing attempts in those 6 losses, only 103 yards, 3.1 yards per rushing attempt. Now, the 3rd down conversion, actually a little bit better in those losses, 44, let's round it up, 45% on 3rd downs. However, just 18% on 4th down. So Coach Rule, a little bit better decision making there. And then compound that with 13 turnovers in those 6 losses. Let's take a look to see if the issue was with the defensive unit there. And in those 6 victories, Nebraska's defense was giving up 10.3 points per game, 201 yards per game on 32 passing attempts by their opponent, 6.4 yards per attempt, 11.2 yards per completion. This run defense was absolutely suffocating to their opponents. 29 rushing attempts for just 76 yards per game, 2.6 yards per rushing attempt there. Their opponents in those 6 wins for Nebraska, just 30% conversion rate on 3rd downs, 36% on 4th downs, did force 10 turnovers in those 6 contests that they won. In the 6 losses, allowing 29 points per game. Remember I said when they stepped up in weight class, they were losing, um, facing better offenses, were definitely getting the better of the Cornhuskers defense. 218 yards per game passing. So the pass defense wasn't the issue, but I want you to look at the pass plays per game goes from 32 a game down to 25. So 7 less plays, but still throwing for more yards. 8.8 yards per attempt, 12.1 yards per completion. The run game also gave way in those losses. Opponents, 32 rushing attempts per game, but now going for 136 yards per game, 4.3 yards per rushing attempt. Their opponents on third downs in those losses, 37% on third downs, but 63% on fourth downs, and only forced a total of 6 turnovers in those losses. We'll go ahead and talk about what went wrong for Nebraska, and then we'll get to the final grade and the final verdict. This team struggled to finish drives on offense. Turnovers in critical moments cost this team, and then inconsistency on both sides of the ball against quality opponents. So the final verdict and the final grade for the 2024 Nebraska Cornhuskers. And folks, we're going to give the Nebraska Cornhuskers a grade of a C+. We like having the winning record. We just felt like there were more opportunities left on the table for this team to really increase that win total there. So, final verdict. The final verdict for the Nebraska Cornhuskers, this team showed promise at times, but lacked consistency in key areas, especially in close game situations. Improving efficiency in the red zone and reducing turnovers will be critical for this team's future success coming up in the 2025 season. Nebraska showed flashes of competitiveness, but ultimately fell short due to an offense that was inefficient and inconsistent. The defense held up well in several games, but the offensive struggles to sustain drives, converting on third downs, finishing in the red zone was problematic for this team. Turnovers, untimely penalties were a major issue that prevented the Cornhuskers from reaching their full potential last season. So in our final 2 minutes here, let's talk about what the Cornhuskers need to do in 2025 to get that third-year bump under head coach Matt Rule. Key number 1, they must develop a more balanced and efficient offensive attack. The passing game needs to improve. I talked about Dylan Raiola. Got to cut down on the turnovers. That helps with better play calling and better execution there from your offense from an overall standpoint. We talked about it, reducing the turnovers. When you're in that many close games, the turnover margin is absolutely critical. And for a team that only committed 17 turnovers, but when I look at the games that they lost, 13 of those turnovers came in games that they lost. So that's where we're talking about reduce the turnovers in critical game time situations. Final key, enhance the third down and red zone execution. Converting key opportunities will make a significant difference in close games. Folks, and our final thoughts here. If the Nebraska Cornhuskers focus on these areas, not only can Nebraska have a winning season next year, but absolutely can be a threat there in the Big Ten to kind of push their way into the top tier of that conference.
Thank you for tuning into this podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and our deep dive into all things college football. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like this video and hit that subscribe button. You can follow us on Twitter at CrunchTimeVIP for updates, insights, and more content. And make sure to visit our website at crunchtimesportsadvantage.com for in-depth blogs, game previews, and information about our Crunch Time Express handicapping packages. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time for our next patient on the 2024 College Football Autopsy Report.